Auburn would be in the playoff and would have gotten that nod over Oklahoma, particularly the way Oklahoma looked in the Big 12 championship game. But they're not. First time in 6 playoff seasons, they're not in it. Their season would be best described as what, Coach?
Disappointing for the people in Tuscaloosa, because the standard has been set, Stench, that anything less than not a championship, a national championship,
right, that's a good point,
is a disappointment. And you mentioned it, Dari. Okay, so it's one thing to get beat by your rival on the road. That's pretty devastating, especially in that state, when everything goes towards the Iron Bowl. But for that game, now looking back, to have knocked you out of the college football playoff for the first time since it started is crushing, okay? But I will say this, people are going to question, what's their mindset going to be like going in to this bowl game against Michigan, right? The last time we saw this was in the 2010 regular season, and they went against an 11-1 at the time Michigan State team from the Big Ten, and they crushed them. It was 49-7. One thing I will say about Nick, he will have his football team ready to play. The question I have, Stench, is how many guys played in the Iron Bowl that may not play in this game, because as opposed to 7-8 years ago, the game has changed with players not participating in these bowl games.
And there are potentially a whole lot of first-round and second-round picks, mostly first on that roster.
And a lot of guys that are used to contending for championships, as you pointed out, Coach, not at the conference level. They skip that. They can bypass the conference championship. The expectation is to contend for national titles, and the fact that that's been their experience, and because they project so well to the next level, you have to wonder, is it just a mindset? It might be an availability issue more than anything else for Alabama. And when you look at the way this season unfolded, and even the way it started out, coming out of camp, they were shorthanded. They didn't have Deontay Brown at right guard for the first 5 games. They had injuries right in the middle of that defensive front. And by the end of the season, they have 5 true freshmen playing on that defense. They played throughout the season, but those guys were starting for them, playing good ball for them, or trying to anyway. This is inexperienced, brand new football players that are being asked to play at a championship level. You just can't expect to reload that efficiently. They recruit at an elite level, there's no doubt. But there is no substitute for some level of experience. So you can recruit a 5-star, but have to have 5 of those out on the field. When you look at the way this season went, you got a new offensive coordinator, you got a bunch of new faces on defense, you had an injury to one of the most transcendent talents at quarterback. Yeah, it was a letdown, but boy, is there a lot of context around it.
There's a whole lot of statistics in these notes that our research crew has given us, and there's one that will stand out to a lot of people. When you think Alabama, you think the biggest weakness is what? Defense? You know where they rank nationally in defensive efficiency? Nationally, 10th. Still a pretty good number.
No, it's unacceptable, Dart.
No, but it just, I think a lot of people would have thought it would be a lot worse than 10th.
Sure, you're right. It's a good point.
Right? All right, so here you go. The Citrus Bowl matchup, Alabama and Michigan. You know who will play? Talk about, we don't know necessarily some of the guys who will not play. You know who will play? Mac Jones will play.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at a reason to watch this game or to find some reason to pull something away from it as we get to know Michigan and the Wolverines and what they've done this season, their 3 losses, Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin. Some people thought this season was going to spiral out of control to a 7-5, even a 6-6 number early on after the Wisconsin beatdown. They're better than I think a lot of people thought they would be of late. But look, for a Mac Jones, for instance, this is a precursor to potentially taking the reins full-time next year. Would you?
Yeah, I think it's a glimpse into the future for sure, Dari. And it's going to be interesting because now he's going to have a full allotment of time to prepare for this team, right? And one thing that I will say about a Michigan defense, if you really want to talk Michigan ball, they're going to hang their hat on physicality on defense. They're going to hang their hat on being very aggressive. Don Brown every year is going to dial up and have defensive schemes that are going to be problematic, okay? Now, where they could be a little vulnerable is they play a little bit of, probably play a little bit too much man coverage, because he's going to do a lot of stunning and blitzing up front. A lot of backs are to the ball. And look, you play a lot of man coverage against these wideouts.
Yeah.
And if Mac Jones is on and he is efficient, it's rack yards. What are rack yards? It's run after the catch. And there's nobody in the country that I've seen in the last 2 years, barring nobody, that is better with the ball in their hands after the catch than Alabama's wideouts.
So you're telling
who
me
we want to see play in this game.
That's right. Oh, yeah,
Yes.
we'd love to, right? And when you think about that, too, we talk about availability. 3 of their top 4 guys, they're all draft-eligible guys. These are guys that could be considering, am I going to play in this bowl game? Even still, you still got a Jalen Waddle, right? He's definitely playing college football next season. He's a difference maker. But when you look at that defense and what they've been all season long, and you think, boy, this has been our identity. We're going to play a lot of heavy man and a lot of activity in the core. Boy, is that dangerous. When you look at what they've been in the passing game, and you mentioned Mac Jones, the other piece of it is when you look at another elite team like an Ohio State Buckeyes offense, and they ran right over Michigan. You think about Najee Harris. Is he going to be in this thing? Is he going to be dialed in? And if not, is it Brian Robinson? Who steps up in that rushing attack? I do think you'll see a full complement of the Alabama offensive front. If for some reason the passing game doesn't get rocking and rolling versus this Michigan secondary, which I think it can, regardless, they can always shift gears to that other phase of their offense. I think Najee Harris was largely overlooked throughout this season because of how good they are at wide receiver.
Yeah, and he was much better near the end of the season.
Yeah,
it's almost like he was running Dari.
Yeah.
We had that conversation. At that one point, man, he just started to get better and better and run more physical the last 2 or 3 games.
No doubt. Remember what he did in the LSU game, even in a loss. He was tremendous. All right. The only thing weirder, by the way, than seeing Alabama not in a playoff game is if they were not in a playoff game and were not playing on New Year's Day. They are playing on New Year's Day against Michigan. PB.
Thank you, Dari. How about Florida Gators? They've had some
Excessive celebration penalty against Ole Miss. 35-yard extra point to tie the game. The pick is up, and it is no good! They won't be able to stop them from partying tonight in Starkville. Mississippi State, in an instant classic, wins it by 1.
Not going to lie, y'all, I'll talk about that Egg Bowl for 30 years. And the reason why is because now Joe Moorhead and the Mississippi State Bulldogs are going bowling. Franklin American Mortgage Music City Bowl. They're headed to Nashville to take on Louisville. And that game coming up December 30th, 4 p.m. right here on ESPN. Joining us right now is the head coach of the Bulldogs, Coach Joe Moorhead. And Coach, let's break this down. When you hear that, hey, obviously you're going to a bowl, but you find out that it's going to be the Cardinals you're going to face, what was your first thoughts?
No, I have the utmost respect for Coach Satterfield in Louisville and what he's done with the program. I've known Scott since he was the coordinator at App State. I've spent some time talking ball with him. And, obviously did a phenomenal job at App as a head coach, and now carrying that over and have a chance to build up the Louisville program. So I think it'll be an excellent matchup. It's a great location in Nashville, close for our fans. And, I think it's going to be a great experience.
You and I have talked about this multiple times about the importance of winning a bowl game and carrying on that momentum. Didn't get a chance to do that last year. How important is it to do it this year leading into 2020?
Very important. And the message to our kids was we want to put an exclamation point on the 19th season for the seniors. And you really look at this as the first game of the 2020 season to build momentum. Going into the year with what we graduated defensively, losing 8 guys in the front 4, a bunch of guys on offense, and obviously, the suspensions to start the season, a myriad of injuries for our kids to believe in the culture and continue to fight and scratch and claw throughout the season, get bowl eligible, win the Egg Bowl, get to 6 wins. That this game's critical on a lot of different levels.
Scratch and claw. That's exactly what I think of when I hear Kylan Hill and the way he runs the ball. How do you expect to get him involved in practices all the way leading up to that and especially in that game?
Yeah, Kyle's about 50 yards from breaking the state school single-season rushing record. Going into the season, one of our, areas that we look to do, get him the ball more, and he's definitely produced, close to 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns, and the offense is centered around and with Kyle's ability to run the ball successfully, and that's something we're going to have to do in the bowl.
Coach, when you talk about relationships, you talked about Scott Satterfield, but do you call his rival, which is now going to be Mark Stoops, and go, hey, you guys had a lot of success in the Governor's Cup running the ball, especially with Lynn Bowden Jr. Do you make that call and try to get a little film on him?
Well, we got the film, so I'm going to head in tomorrow. Just flew into Jackson for some recruiting. We'll get back in tomorrow, start looking a little bit at the tape. But I kind of look at the stat line on it, and Lynn was 1 of 2 for 4 yards, and I think they rushed for upwards of 500 yards on a bunch of carries. And, I recruited Lynn at Penn State, and I think he's one of the most dynamic players in the country. And, and you look at the games, Louisville very, very competitive with Clemson, have had some great wins and some close losses. So, it's definitely going to be a great matchup.
Coach, looking forward to it. Happy holidays to you, and we'll see if the Bulldogs can get a bowl win, all right?
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Hail State.
There it is. Hail State. Joe Moorhead talking about it. And here it is. Get to know them. He talked about Scott Satterfield, first year. Remember, ACC Coach of the Year. A fantastic job by him in that first year, going from 7-5, taking over for Bobby Petrino when he was over at that program. Dari Noka?
PB, we're walking into week 13 of the season thinking Mississippi State's not going to make a bowl game. They had to win their final 2, and it really was ultimately going to come down to the Egg Bowl.
Worked out.
One extra hike went their way, and they end up now in a bowl game. How do you take advantage of that? How do you take maybe catching a break and moving forward and advancing with this opportunity?
Well, you look at the way Mississippi State what they had to endure throughout this season, and the fact that the quarterback position was never one of stability. And coming into it, everyone thought under Joe Moorhead, look, he had that piece that he needed to have at quarterback for his offense to click the way that it did at Penn State. And it really was never able to get solidified with Tommy Stevens and Garrett Schrader jockeying in and out whenever you have to have a true freshman at quarterback. But I do think that the momentum that can carry over out of a rivalry game, and when you look at those and the meaning of that game, it cost Matt Luke his job probably. Could have been the inverse of that had it gone the other direction. And as you mentioned, a fortuitous celebration that came in handy. What do you do with that? Well, I think there's a level of momentum that can be carried not only into recruiting, but through that month of preparation for that bowl. I think Mississippi State has a chance to capitalize on what was clearly their best victory, their most important victory of any season, but certainly of this one over Ole Miss.
How motivated was Joe Moorhead going into that Egg Bowl game? And afterwards, talking about you're going to have to carry my Yankee butt out of here. The guy wants to be there. Now he gets 15 extra practices. Every coach that's not in the national championship hunt talks about the importance of those extra practices, particularly with some of the inconsistencies that they still have. But the one thing we could always count on with Mississippi State every Saturday, I know you saw him in person a lot, it's Kylan Hill, right? Kylan Hill, what he's done this season without having any real threat of the complementary passing game, without having the consistency at the quarterback, without having any sort of consistency on the offensive line, for him to be second in the conference in total yards rushing this year is an amazing feat and something that I think he wants to come back and motivated to finish up in the bowl game here against Louisville's defense.
He has had some huge games, and he's had some games where he's kind of disappeared. Louisville defensively is not very good.
You don't think he's salivating looking at those statistics that Kentucky rolled up?
He's looking to put an exclamation point on
this is defensively against the run. Louisville is 115th.
They give up 517 yards and 6 touchdowns. You were there that day, right?
I actually was there.
They were actually
the whole time.
4th in the country before the Kentucky game. It dropped them to 115th. That's how bad they were not really 4th in the country. But that's the approach here, right? Just hand the ball off and run it as much as you want to do it. That's the plan.
I mean, I think that's
you would think,
That's
and
what you
stop the big play. Yeah, that's offensively, and then defensively versus Louisville, stop the big play because Mikhail Cunningham, he's a guy that can extend plays. They will take shots. They're a pretty good rushing offense as Louisville. And so because of that, you can't allow eye discipline errors in the secondary. Guys start looking in that backfield. They're a heavy play action passing team. They've got a ton of explosive plays. It's been very surprising. Mississippi State can dampen that defensively. It's a winning formula.
Yeah, why does the play action work well for them? Because of Javian Hawkins, the running back who over 1,400 yards this year. So he's done a nice job in terms of providing some of that explosiveness that you talked about. But this is a Mississippi State team. You turn the tape on. Some weeks they look good defensively, and some weeks they're out of position. Some weeks they're not communicating in the secondary. So I want to see how focused those guys are on the side of the ball because, like you said, if you don't have that eye discipline, if you're not able to play your assignment and get cut up in somebody else's assignment, you can get beat over the top pretty quickly.
Yeah, we talk about a lot of good coaching jobs, too. Scott Satterfield went in and turned a 2-10 team into a 7-5.
They were miserable in every phase last year.
Yeah.
So they're just miserable on defense now. They improved on every other spot.
Baby steps. Baby steps, man. And in that league, they can advance quickly. We know that, too.
No doubt.
In the ACC. All right. Still ahead. A little bit later in the show, our own Greg McElroy going to join us. His take on that LSU-Oklahoma matchup in Atlanta, as well as other bowl games. Again, we've got 9 total. Mention the ACC and Louisville's chance to rise quickly. It can happen. It has happened with Florida's opponent in the Capital One Orange Bowl. We'll dive into the Gators